Chester near the intersection of Route 10 and I-295, southeast of Richmond and north of Hopewell. This is a more enlarged map showing the project. You can see that unnamed tributaries on the project site drain to Johnson Creek, which then discharges to the James River. Proposed impacts due to this project include the permanent fill of 8.21 acres of isolated forested wetlands, 1.44 acres of non-isolated forested wetlands, 0.22 acre of non-isolated emergent wetlands, and 84 linear feet of stream channel, as well as the permanent conversion of 0.05 acre of forested wetlands to emergent wetlands, for a total of 9.92 acres of wetlands and 84 linear feet of stream channel impacts. The applicant proposed to purchase mitigation bank credits to offset surface water impacts. All forested wetland impacts must be mitigated at a 2-to-1 impact computation to impact ratio. Emergent wetland impacts and conversion impacts must be mitigated at a 1-to-1 ratio. And the mitigation requirement for stream channel impacts was determined using a functional assessment known as the unified stream methodology. The application was received on May 5th, 2016. Public notice of the hearing was published on May 25th, 2016, and the public comment period ran from May 25th to July 13th. A public hearing was held June 28th, 2016. One commenter spoke at the public hearing in support of the project on behalf of the applicant. After the public hearing, 37 written comments were received during the public comment period. I've grouped and summarized the public comments received and will provide staff responses to each. The first comment was regarding the proposed compensatory mitigation plan. Commenters indicated that the proposed off-site compensatory mitigation was too far away to offset losses of surface waters, including wetlands, and requested on-site compensatory mitigation. Scientific studies and EQ experience have indicated that the use of mitigation bank credits is ecologically preferable to on-site mitigation, such as restoration or creation, when conducted by the permittee. The original draft permit allowed credit purchases at any mitigation bank within the same hydrologic unit code as impacts, or an adjacent hydrologic unit code and the same watershed, based on the statute. However, pursuant to comments received, the draft permit was modified to require wetland credits to be purchased from the Eastern Henrico Mitigation Bank, 15 miles north of the project site. The bank is the nearest bank with a sufficient number of wetland credits that are available. The second set of comments were related to potential surface water quality degradation. Commenters were concerned that pollutants from the adjacent industrial park would no longer be buffered by on-site wetlands, and that pollutants discharged may result in a human health risk from fish or shellfish consumption due to diminished water quality in the James River, downstream of this project site. Permit conditions were developed to protect downstream water quality during construction. The permit requires minimization of impacts to in-stream beneficial uses. It prohibits downstream increases in turbidity. It requires in-stream work during low flow conditions only. It prohibits and requires prevention of spills, and it requires that erosion and sediment controls be installed and maintained throughout the life of construction activity. A BPDES construction general permit is also required. This permit requires installation project does not drain to the Appomattox River. Therefore, staff does not anticipate any adverse effect. The fourth set of comments express concern regarding proposed wetland losses, that they may have a negative impact on citizens' quality of life, specifically hiking, walking, bird watching, or boating at Chesterfield National Wildlife Refuge and surrounding areas. Runoff from this project travels 4 miles via Johnson Creek to the James River. Chesterfield National Wildlife Refuge is an additional 2.5 miles upstream of the confluence of Johnson Creek with the James. Given the distance, staff does not anticipate adverse effects from this project on the activities occurring within or near Chesterfield National Wildlife Refuge. The fifth comment expressed concern regarding potential adverse effects to the health of fish and birds and mammals that consume small wildlife. DEQ coordinated with the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. None of these agencies identified adverse effects to fish or wildlife resources resulting from this project. The sixth set of comments requested relocation of the project and an adjustment of site plans to build around surface waters, avoiding impacts. 9 VAC 25-210-115C requires that an applicant demonstrate to the satisfaction of the board that avoidance and minimization opportunities have been identified and applied to the proposed activity, and that practicable alternatives, including design alternatives, have been evaluated for the proposed activity. The regulation further states that practicable means available and capable of being done after taking into consideration cost, existing technology, and logistics, in light of overall project purposes. The parcel selected is the only site that meets the project purpose by having the necessary size, zoning, and proximity to the Amazon distribution center. In order to avoid surface water impacts, prior to submitting the application, the applicant worked with the prospective user to reduce the required square footage from one 750,000 square foot building and a second 500,000 square foot building to a single 600,000 square foot building. In addition, the applicant evaluated alternative site layouts to determine if impacts could be avoided. Design changes were made prior to application to reduce impacts, including steeper slopes to reduce a grading footprint, making crossings of utilities and roads perpendicular to surface waters, and consolidating road and utility crossings. Based on the above, staff believes, and the permit application and additional submittals, staff believes that the proposed site plan is the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative and has met the requirements of 9 VAC 25-210-115C. The seventh set of comments requested disclosure of the total cumulative impacts resulting from Meadowville Technology Park, including previous, current, and future development. Although DEQ does promote the use of master plan developments as a way to avoid impacts to surface waters through advanced planning, in recent years DEQ has avoided permitting master plan developments without identified end users in place. Permitting impacts for an entire master plan development years or decades before end users are identified encourages speculative development, which may result in surface water impacts occurring without a clear need. Requiring an end user prior to authorizing impacts also ensures that the mitigation required for impacts adheres to the most current standards and practices in place at the time that impacts actually occur. Because all future users have not been identified, specific site needs and associated impacts cannot be entirely accounted for at this time. However, DEQ was shown the master plan for this development, and it appears that the pods are outside of wetlands and streams to the extent they can be. Meadowville Technology Park consists of a total of 1,350 acres, which contains 166 acres and 13,452 linear feet of stream. The total impacts to date, including those proposed, are 13.96 acres of wetlands and 312 linear feet of stream. 152 acres of wetlands have been avoided, and 13,230 linear feet of stream channel has also been avoided. wetland characterization on the site. Commenters expressed concern that the preliminary jurisdictional determination issued by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers relied too heavily on applicants' wetlands delineation work. They expressed concerns that the wetlands delineation data points may not be representative of all the wetlands on the site, and that the wetlands designated as isolated during the delineation may not in fact be isolated. And the final concern was that wetlands designated by the applicant as being the result of silvicultural activities may have been present prior to silvicultural activities. In accordance with Virginia Code 62.1-44.15:21 and 9 BAC 25-210-45, DEQ accepts wetland delineations conducted using the procedures in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual and regional supplements for permitting purposes. Confirmation of the wetland boundary by the Corps via preliminary or approved jurisdictional determination fulfills this requirement. The Corps relied on information submitted by the applicant and also conducted a field visit to verify the data submitted for this site. Data points collected for wetlands delineation purposes do not have to be representative of all wetlands on the site. This is why DEQ requires a functional values assessment, which was conducted by the applicant, and why DEQ staff conducted site visits in late 2014 and March 2015. Differentiation between isolated and non-isolated wetlands is made by the Corps during the delineation confirmation in order to determine Corps jurisdiction under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Isolated wetlands are not considered jurisdictional by the Corps under Section 404. However, whether or not a wetland is isolated does not affect DEQ's jurisdiction under state water control law, nor does it affect DEQ's evaluation of avoidance minimization and compensatory mitigation proposals. DEQ did not take into account the applicant's assertion that isolated forested wetlands formed as a result of silvicultural activities when determining appropriate avoidance minimization or compensatory mitigation. Functional differences do exist between the isolated and non-isolated systems on this site, due in part to differing vegetative characteristics and hydrologic regimes. These functional differences, however, did not result in preferential avoidance of one wetland system or another, nor were they sufficient to alter standard mitigation ratios for forested wetland impacts. All forested wetlands were considered to have equally important, though different, functional benefits. Verbal comments were received during the public hearings supporting the project and proposed permit. Staff acknowledges receipt of these comments. As discussed previously, the draft permit was modified to require wetland mitigation credits be purchased from the Eastern Henrico Mitigation Bank, which is the nearest mitigation bank with sufficient credits, approximately 15 miles north of the project site. The following sentence was added to the permit cover page. Wetland mitigation bank credits shall be purchased from the Eastern Henrico Mitigation Bank in Henrico County, Virginia. In addition, Part 1C1 of the permit was split into two separate conditions, 1C1 and 1C2, and language was added to 1C1 as follows. As compensation for wetland impacts, the permittee shall purchase 19.57 wetland credits from the Eastern Henrico Mitigation Bank in Henrico County, Virginia. Are there any questions?
Good morning. The information that was provided to the State Water Control Board did not include any, in your presentation, did not include any site plan for the project and exactly showing us, you know, where the wetland is located, where it's going to be impacted. Do you have that information? Do you have a site plan today with you?
Not with me, but I can provide one, or I can get one from you.
You put some information about what the regulations require us to analyze, and that was in your response to comment 6, and I would have no way of fulfilling the obligations, I believe, without seeing, a site plan of the project, the wetlands that are going to be impacted, the mitigation that we're being asked to approve. Let me ask you, is the wetland, the 8-acre or so impact, the forested wetland, is that part of a larger forested wetland, or is 8.121?
The isolated wetland.
The isolated forest wetland.
It's
Yeah.
not part, it is the isolated system.
So that's the entire system itself is 8.21 acres, and the entire part will be, let me see here, you've got Palestine emergent wetlands, you've got your Palestine forested wetlands, which are dark brown, I guess that's that. Oh, sure, what is, I think it is, but this is the one that's impacted, permanent wetland impacts. So, essentially it's in between, it looks like it's completely, so that's the complete footprint of the building is right on top of the wetland.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the, see it or not, but there doesn't look to be any wetlands, on the other side of the linear wetland. That would be to the north of the building. And it looks like that's still on the project site, but
It's within Meadowville Technology Park, that other section. However, it's not, the applicant, the user needed the site to be directly adjacent to Amazon and share the entrance road with Amazon so that they could, for their distribution requirements. So moving it to the north wouldn't meet the project purpose across the tributary that I believe are.
that's what I was talking about. Okay. And then as far as the mitigation bank, do you have any information on that?
It drains the Chickahominy River. Okay, what do you want? I can show you where it is if you'd like.
Well, what I'm wondering is, I'm well aware that, a forested wetland is something that takes a long time to become forested. So, what are what are the functions, benefits, features of the wetland mitigation bank that are compensating for that habitat, or for that wetland, I should say?
Good morning, I'm Dave Davis. I'm with the Office of Wetlands and Stream Protection, and in central office we manage all of the mitigation banks statewide, including the Eastern Henrico Bank. We receive monitoring reports from every mitigation bank in the Commonwealth, and we evaluate the success criteria of those banks on a particular schedule, generally about every year. As the bank matures, it becomes a little bit longer. And we review this in the context of not just DEQ, but core regulations, Fish and Wildlife Service, and a number of other resource agencies. To date, the Eastern Henrico Mitigation Bank is meeting all of its success criteria. So the credits that are available are approved and meeting success.
How old is the age of that wetland?
Roughly, it's about 6, maybe 7 years old.
And what style wetland is it? What style wetland bank? Just an
It's-
open wetland bank?
It's, the ultimate plan is for forested wetlands. So it's you can't walk out there today and see, really tall trees, but they are growing. It is progressing on a normal ecological trajectory.
Allison, can you speak to the nature of the existing wetland on that building site? What the quality of it is? Is it?
It's younger growth, well, the big isolated wetland is the one
Yeah.
we're more familiar with. So the trees are mixed hardwoods and pines, but mostly pines in most areas, because that area was planted to pine a while back.
Okay, so it was a tree farm or silviculture area?
There has been silviculture activity on the site before, yes, and it was replanted in pine. So in areas that support pine, there's pine growing. In other areas, there's mixed hardwoods. Say so 15 to 20 years old. And it was last timbered about 15 to 20 years ago.
One more question I have, and I'm going to change the subject on you a little bit. The master plan, does the master plan show proposed stormwater BMPs and drainage and
It does.
whatnot too?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Moving to another set of questions. You described impacts to date. This is under comment 7. And you described impacts to date and then avoided resources. And I was wondering, what are the legal mechanisms that are being used to ensure that those avoided resources are permanently protected?
These are only protected under regulation and statute through the Virginia Water Protection Permit and the Clean Water Act. They're not permanently protected wetlands and streams. They're just avoided at this point.
So in other words, they could come back, because seems, if I'm reading, if I read the materials correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, it appears that the agency decided not to look at this as a whole project, but to look at it at any time somebody came in with an application for a specific part of the project, part of the site for development.
Yes, ma'am. We
Okay.
require that they have an identified user, so we know exactly what the square footage and parking and stormwater management requirements are before we permit those impacts.
Okay. That's one way of doing things, but I guess the issue here is that if you're avoiding, if avoidance is part of our regulations, as it actually is one of, the criteria is avoidance. So if you are alleging here in this report that they are avoiding resources, then in order for us to make a decision on that's pertinent, those would have to be protected from another permit application coming in next year for another building site that is, so I'm not sure that avoided is really either relevant or applicable, to this situation, because those are not permanently protected in terms of avoided. They're just, so far they haven't got to them.
I understand.
Yes, Madam Chair, maybe 2 points. One is that this issue of whether or not you have an identified user or not has been a fairly significant issue for us and for the Corps around the Commonwealth, because there has been some interest in sort of proactively getting permits for sites when there is in fact not an identified user. And without an identified user, we can't evaluate whether or not there was adequate avoidance and minimization because we don't know what the footprint needs to look like and those sorts of things. So, so that as you've heard, that's the way that we in the Corps have operated the program. I don't believe there's anything in code that says that because you've avoided it now, you have to have avoided it for all time. What the code does say is that you have to have avoided it for that footprint and that we have to have had adequate compensation for whatever wetlands are being filled. Another sort over the years issue that has been discussed is whether or not preservation is in fact a legitimate component of a permit, because with preservation you in fact have loss. You're preventing future loss, but you in fact do have loss. And so our sort of triage of compensation that we look for is not preservation, but it is compensation at, as you've seen, frequently a 2-to-1 ratio, so that as a Commonwealth, at least, we have not only theoretically we've at least not only stopped net loss, but we've reversed it. But I don't believe that we could find any authority that would say that because you've avoided it this time, you have to have avoided it for all time, because we don't know what the future holds.
Madam Chair, I'll add to that I'm not aware of any statutory or regulatory requirement that says that wetlands that are avoided in this instance must be avoided in perpetuity. I would also say that any future projects will be subject to the exact same permanent requirements that the projects are subject to. Would also have to avoid, minimize, and compensate for the impacts in that future instance.
Well, I apologize. I guess my, my past experience as working in New York with both federal and state wetland regulations in development context, primarily on the applicant side, was much different, I would say, than if you had a site plan, a permit that was granted, and part of your permit review included your avoidance, meeting your avoidance criteria, that avoidance was, memorialized in the final decision that then was avoided. So when we're talking about the relevance of, avoided resources, it's not avoided, it's just we haven't gotten to them yet. I just wanted to make that clear.
Roberta, if I can, I think what, and I'm going to speak from my experience as a former state regulator under a different agency, but I think that each of these applications come in on big mega subdivisions or business parks like this, industrial parks, and they're done on a case-by-case basis, in the sense that the next applicant that comes in at the next site, and let's say it's over by some of these other wetlands, they're going to have to go through the same process and same work with Virginia DEQ to be able to demonstrate that they have avoided and minimized to the greatest extent practical, and then provide that compensation. So it's not that the next person that comes in is going to be able to maybe make the same take. They're going to go through the same process, much like this applicant, where if you remember, this applicant wanted to build 2 buildings and now they've downsized and fit into 1. So I think there's been some effort here, and I think that effort will continue in the future. And as long as I've been involved in this kind of work, that's how these agencies run that process.
Excuse me, if I could just clarify, I think you actually made the point that these Okay, there's a regulatory criteria for avoided. So that means that it has gone through a process and been designated as avoided. What you're saying here is that these have not been through any process yet. They are just haven't, those building sites have not yet been, nobody's applied for something.
But when they do,
But
they
this-
will.
I'm talking about this.
Okay.
Okay, it's a description, it's a legal term, because that's what it says in the code, avoid. So this criteria, this section here that's described as avoided resources, you can't designate something as avoided until it's been through a process and been avoided. It just hasn't, actually, nobody's applied to do anything there yet. That's what my question, that's what my clarification on the staff report is that these are not avoided because they haven't been through a process yet to avoid them. Nobody's applied to do anything. They may in fact be unavoided in the future. Okay, so to give a, I'm not sure if this was designed to demonstrate that there's going to be 152 acres left at this site once this project is approved. That's my initial read of it, was that, okay, there's gonna be so you've got 1,350 acre site. That's the big part, right?
The master plan.
That's the master plan. And there's going to be 152 acres out of that site that are going to be avoided. But that's not exactly true, because there may be future applications put in that will ask to develop those wetlands. So we don't know what the ultimate avoided resources will be. Is that correct?
I think